These are 13 of Hollywood's most expensive disasters and the A-list stars who've spent decades trying to make you forget they ever happened. From George Clooney's repeated apologies to Johnny Depp blaming critics, here's what happens when $100 million productions crash and burn. George Clooney has turned apologizing for Batman and Robin into something of a performance art piece, which makes him Hollywood's most self-aware flop survivor by a wide margin. Warner Bros. Poured $160 million into this 1997 superhero sequel, then spent another $125 million on marketing, and what they got back felt like a slap in the face. The film pulled in $238 million worldwide, which sounds respectable until you remember that Batman Forever had earned $336 million just 2 years earlier. What makes Clooney's situation fascinating isn't the 11% score on Rotten Tomatoes, because plenty of actors have survived worse reviews. The thing that sets him apart is that he's never stopped talking about it, never tried to pretend it didn't happen. On The Graham Norton Show back in 2015, he admitted that he always apologizes for Batman and Robin and genuinely believed he'd destroyed the franchise until they brought it back. His 2020 interview with GQ went even further, with Clooney saying that whenever he calls it a terrible film, he always adds that he was terrible in it. Number 1. Clooney won't let his wife Amal or his children watch it, telling interviewers there are certain films where he just needs his wife to have some respect for him. He even tracked down Adam West to apologize in person for ruining Batman, including the infamous batsuit nipples. The real irony involves the paychecks. Clooney walked away with roughly $1 million, while Arnold Schwarzenegger collected $25 million for playing Mr. Freeze and delivering endless ice puns. Clooney has since credited the failure with indirectly making him a movie star, because it forced him to completely reconsider his approach to acting. Kevin Costner represents the complete opposite approach to handling professional humiliation, where Clooney apologizes endlessly and turns his failure into self-deprecating charm. Costner refuses to acknowledge that anything went wrong. $175 million. That's what Waterworld eventually cost, making it the most expensive film ever produced at that time. The original budget had been set at $100 million, but then sets sank during a Hawaiian storm. Director Kevin Reynolds quit after heated battles with Costner over creative decisions, and critics started calling it Fishtar and Kevin's Gate before anyone had even seen a frame. The worldwide gross reached $264 million against that bloated budget, plus $60 million in marketing costs. And yet Costner insists to this day that it annoys him whenever Waterworld appears on flops lists, because according to him, that's simply not true, and the film made money. Then came The Postman 2 years later. $80 million produced returns of just $27 million. The Golden Raspberry Awards handed it 5 trophies, including Worst Picture, Worst Director, and Worst Actor, and Gene Siskel sarcastically renamed it Dances with Myself. Costner refused Warner Brothers' appeals to cut the 3-hour runtime, and the studio released it opposite Titanic on Christmas Day, 1997. The film ends with a statue of Costner's character, and he sings a duet with Amy Grant over the closing credits. His response captures everything about his approach. Costner maintains that he always thought it was a really good movie, just a modern-day fairy tale. These back-to-back disasters launched Costner into a decade-long cold streak, and his full career revival didn't arrive until Yellowstone premiered in 2018. $18.5 million. That's all this pirate adventure earned worldwide, which wouldn't be so remarkable if the production company Carolco hadn't spent somewhere between $92 and $115 million making it. The Guinness World Record listed Cutthroat Island as the biggest box office flop in history for years. Carolco canceled Arnold Schwarzenegger's Crusade to fund this project, abandoning $13 million already spent on development. Michael Douglas quit after Gina Davis's role expanded at his expense. Director Rennie Harlin, who happened to be Davis's husband at the time, later revealed that both of them begged the studio to release them from the project. His exact words were that Gina was scared mindless about headlining this film, and they both felt a pirate movie with a female lead was suicidal for their careers. The production problems kept multiplying. Oliver Reed got fired after allegedly mooning Davis on set. Sewage filled the tank where actors were supposed to swim, and Carolco had to raise an extra $40 million from European banks just to finish filming. 1 month before release, Carolco filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Davis has handled this skeleton in her closet differently than her male counterparts. Unlike actors who've discussed their disasters extensively, she's largely avoided the topic entirely. She regretted accepting the part once it became clear the film was doomed and tried to back out, but her contract wouldn't allow it. Her pivot to advocacy work through the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media gave her a second act. The film's catastrophe effectively ended the pirate genre until Pirates of the Caribbean showed up in 2003. Halle Berry's acceptance of her Razzie Award in person for Catwoman remains one of Hollywood's most memorable moments of self-deprecating grace, a masterclass in turning humiliation into triumph. $100 million went into this superhero film, and Warner Bros. Got back just $82 million worldwide, with $40 million from domestic audiences. Berry's paycheck landed somewhere between $12 and $14 million plus 10% of gross. Critics savaged it with an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes, and Roger Ebert put it on his most hated films list. February 2005 brought the Golden Raspberry Awards, and Berry became one of the first A-list actors to accept a Razzie in person. She showed up carrying her Oscar trophy from Monsters Ball and delivered a speech that people still quote today. Her opening line declared that they can't take this away from her because it's got her name on it. Then she thanked Warner Brothers for putting her in a piece of SHT god-awful movie, calling it exactly what her career needed. Berry announced that she'd been at the top, and then Catwoman just plummeted her to the bottom, and she loved it. She thanked her manager Vincent Cirancione for loving her so much that he convinces her to do projects even when he knows they're shite. Years later, Berry clarified her thinking. She explained that she doesn't actually think it's a god-awful film, but she was at the Razzies, so she had to do what they do, which meant she shot on it because they shot on it. She's also pointed out that she made a substantial amount that changed her life. $7.27 million. That's the worldwide gross for a film that cost $75.6 million to produce, making Gigli historic for all the wrong reasons as the first movie ever to sweep all 6 major Razzie categories. Ben Affleck collected $12.5 million, while Jennifer Lopez earned $12 million, which means their combined salaries exceeded every dollar the film earned around the entire world. The second weekend brought an 81.9% drop, setting a record for the steepest decline in box office history. Distribution collapsed from over 2,000 theaters down to just 73 in 3 weeks. The title became a cultural punchline, with Conan O'Brien joking that the Mets were doing so badly they'd be renamed the New York Gigli. What happened behind the scenes explains a lot. The film started as a straightforward mob thriller, but when Affleck and Lopez's Bennifer romance became a tabloid sensation, Sony demanded rewrites to transform it into a romantic comedy against director Martin Brest's wishes. Affleck avoided the subject for years before becoming more candid. His 2022 explanation noted that very few people actually watched Gigli, and he admitted it doesn't work, describing it as a sort of horse's head in a cow's body. The emotional toll ran deep, leaving him depressed and questioning everything. But here's the thing about redemption. Affleck credits Gigli with pushing him toward directing, saying it turned out to be the real love of his professional life. He called it a gift. The Razzie Redeemer Award landed in his hands in 2014 after he directed the Oscar-winning Argo. Director Martin Brest wasn't so fortunate because Gigli ended his career completely. Most actors eventually acknowledge their disasters in some form. John Travolta chose a different path entirely with Battlefield Earth, remaining resolute in defending this adaptation of L. Ron Hubbard's novel for over 2 decades. The actual budget came in at $44 million, though reports claimed $73 to $80 million. Worldwide returns totaled just $29.7 million. Travolta took a reduced salary of $10 million and invested an additional $5 million of his own money. 3% on Rotten Tomatoes made it one of the lowest-rated major studio releases in history. 7 Golden Raspberries arrived in a record-setting haul that included Worst Picture, Worst Actor, Worst Supporting Actor, Worst Supporting Actress, Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, and Worst Screen Couple. It also claimed Worst Drama of Our First 25 Years and Worst Picture of the Decade. Travolta spent 18 years trying to get the film made after receiving a signed copy of the book directly from Hubbard. Major studios passed repeatedly, and Tom Cruise reportedly warned Warner Bros. That it was a bad idea. Travolta asked Quentin Tarantino to direct, but Tarantino declined. During the promotional tour, Travolta compared it to Pulp Fiction for the year 3000, called it like Star Wars only better, and described it as the Schindler's List of science fiction films. His defense has never wavered. In 2014, he dismissed any suggestion of regret, still calling it a beautiful film and a good movie. His co-stars felt differently. Forrest Whitaker expressed dismay at participating. Barry Pepper mentioned he would have personally accepted his Razzie, and screenwriter J.D. Shapiro published an apology in the New York Post. Warren Beatty's response to Town and Country stands as the most extreme in Hollywood history, because he chose complete silence followed by near-total retirement from acting. The numbers tell a story of spiraling catastrophe. Original budget sat at $19 million, but by production start, that figure had ballooned to $44 million. The final cost landed somewhere between $90 and $105 million. Worldwide gross came back at $10.3 million. 12 to 13 release date postponements set a record that still stands. Principal photography began in June 1998 with expectations of wrapping that fall, but filming continued into April 1999 with reshoots running through June 2000, stretching total production time to nearly 3 years. 4 different screenwriters cycled through constant rewrites. A physical altercation reportedly broke out between Beatty and director Peter Chelsom. Thieves broke onto set and stole 2 days' worth of film reels, forcing additional reshoots. Beatty's famous hatred of interviews took on new meaning after this failure. He once explained that he'd rather ride down the street on a camel nude in a snowstorm, backwards than give what is sometimes called an in-depth interview. His rare 2016 Vanity Fair piece, his first major interview in 25 years, made no direct mention of Town and Country. The career impact proved devastating. Town and Country marked Beatty's last film appearance for 15 years until Rules Don't Apply in 2016, which means he essentially retired from acting rather than face questions about what happened. Disney's adaptation of Edgar Rice Burroughs' century-old novels became the textbook example of studio miscalculation. A case study in how not to market a $200 million movie in John Carter. $263.7 million went into production after tax rebates, with marketing adding roughly another $100 million. The worldwide gross reached $284 million, but only $73 million came from domestic audiences. Disney's official write-down totaled $200 million in losses. The marketing failures piled up one after another. Disney changed the title from John Carter of Mars to simply John Carter after Mars Needs Moms flopped, apparently deciding that the word Mars itself was poison. Marketing head M.T. Carney departed just before release, and trailers delivered all vibes and no plot. Star Taylor Kitsch suffered back-to-back failures when both John Carter and Battleship tanked in 2012. His response demonstrated measured acceptance, explaining that it just didn't hit. And over time, you realize you gave it the best you could, you're proud of the way you led that shoot, and you move on. He's also pushed back on the failure label, saying he honestly doesn't see it as a failure and has great memories from it. The film found a second life on Netflix, and people stop him all the time to talk about it, especially in Europe. Disney studio chief Rich Ross resigned in April 2012, the planned trilogy got canceled, and Kitsch pivoted to television with True Detective and Waco. Johnny Depp and Armie Hammer's response to the Lone Ranger's failure stands apart from every other example on this list for one specific reason. They blamed the critics rather than acknowledging anything about the film itself. Disney poured between $215 and $250 million into production, then spent roughly $150 million on marketing, and the worldwide gross came back at $260.5 million. The studio's write-down reached $190 million in losses. Depp's paycheck for playing Tonto hit $20 million. The production nearly collapsed before it started. Disney shut everything down in August 2011 over budget concerns, and the film only got revived after director Gore Verbinski, producer Jerry Bruckheimer, Depp, and Hammer all accepted 20% salary cuts. When the 31% on Rotten Tomatoes arrived alongside disappointing box office, both stars pointed at reviewers. Depp claimed the reviews had been written 7 to 8 months before release and that critics had expectations it must be a blockbuster. Hammer went further, declaring that American critics had been gunning for their movie since it shut down and had decided to slit the jugular of their film. This approach to handling failure produced consequences. Disney ended its long-term relationship with producer Jerry Bruckheimer after this disaster. Director Gore Verbinski hasn't directed a major studio film since. Will Smith has been remarkably candid about After Earth, describing it as more painful than any other setback in his entire career. Sony invested $130 million in production. The worldwide gross reached $243 million, but domestic audiences only contributed $60 million. Opening weekend landed in third place at $27 million. Critics gave it 11% on Rotten Tomatoes, and Rolling Stone compared it directly to Battlefield Earth. Smith's 2015 Esquire interview laid it out plainly, calling it the most painful failure of his career and explaining that Wild Wild West had been less painful because his son wasn't involved. With After Earth, he'd led Jaden into it, and watching his son take the hit proved excruciating. During the Focus Press tour, Smith admitted that something got broken in his mind after Earth failed. His 2021 memoir went even deeper. He wrote that After Earth was an abysmal failure, and what made it worse was that Jaden took the hit. Fans and press were absolutely vicious, saying and printing things about Jaden that Smith refuses to repeat. His son had faithfully done everything his father instructed, and Smith had coached him into the worst public mauling he'd ever experienced. The family cost hit hardest. Smith wrote that Jaden felt betrayed and misled and lost trust in his father's leadership. When Jaden asked about becoming an emancipated minor at 15 years old, Smith's heart shattered. Neither has appeared in a studio tentpole since, and they haven't worked together on screen since. Ryan Reynolds has turned his superhero disaster into comedy gold, transforming failure into arguably the greatest career comeback story in modern Hollywood. $200 million went into production of Green Lantern, with roughly another $100 million on marketing. The worldwide gross landed at $220 million, with estimated losses running between $75 and $100 million. Critics awarded it 26% on Rotten Tomatoes. Reynolds has been characteristically self-deprecating when explaining what went wrong. His analysis pointed to too many people spending too much money, and when problems arose, the thinking was never to stop spending on special effects and focus on character. The approach was just to keep spending through the problems, and it didn't work. Processing that failure required a specific strategy. Reynolds explained it was an odd feeling he never wanted to repeat, so he spent the following years owning as much of it as he could. He's never actually watched the complete film, which becomes funny when you learn his son considers it a favorite and watches it constantly. The failure became Deadpool material in the best possible way. Reynolds wrote the line asking them to please not make the suit green or animated, a direct shot at Green Lantern's CGI costume. Deadpool 2 featured a post-credit scene where the character uses time travel to eliminate Ryan Reynolds while reading the Green Lantern script, saying, "You're welcome, Canada." Director Martin Campbell responded in 2024 by acknowledging Reynolds has every right to make those jokes because the film flopped. Reynolds spent 5 years in career wilderness before Deadpool grossed $783 million on just $58 million. Deadpool and Wolverine became the highest-grossing R-rated film ever at over $1.3 billion. Eddie Murphy's space comedy Pluto Nash achieved almost mythical status among financial disasters, the kind of flop that becomes a punchline for an entire generation of Hollywood observers. $100 million in production costs returned worldwide earnings of $7.1 million. Opening weekend brought in just $2.18 million and landed the film in 10th place. At that time, it marked the worst opening ever for a film playing in over 2,000 theaters. 93% of the production budget simply vanished. Critics delivered 5% on Rotten Tomatoes and 12% on Metacritic. Murphy refused to do any publicity for the film, essentially pretending it didn't exist. His only public comment came during a Barbara Walters interview where he joked that he knows the 2 or 3 people who like this movie. The harshest criticism arrived from an unexpected source. Murphy told the New York Times in 2024 about watching Pluto Nash with his son Miles, who was probably about 8 at the time. He described how the movie just plays soft throughout, and then at the end everything goes silent, and his little baby son just says one word: corny. Murphy called that moment challenging, noting that even the baby knows it's corny. The striking pattern across 4 decades of Hollywood disasters isn't the staggering financial losses. What matters is how actors respond to failure and how those responses predict their career trajectories. George Clooney transformed Batman and Robin into a punchline he controls. Ryan Reynolds turned Green Lantern into Deadpool comedy material worth over $1 billion. Ben Affleck channeled Gilly's wreckage into an Oscar-winning directing career. Meanwhile, those who deflect blame or retreat into silence rarely recover as effectively. Halle Berry demonstrated at the Razzies that accepting a golden raspberry with humor and grace can prove more valuable than any golden statue. The lesson appears clear: own the disaster before it owns you.